Right, so after a bit of a false start, as of 9:15 a.m. on Sunday morning UK time, the ceasefire between Israel and Gaza, Israel and Hamas, came into effect, but not quite in the way it had seemingly been agreed to. Netanyahu tried at the last minute to screw it again. The determined departure of coalition partner party Otzma Yehudit and its depraved leader Itamar Ben-Gvir, prompting some pushback at Trump perhaps, who demanded this ceasefire be in place before his inauguration today. Well, that's been fulfilled. How long for remains to be seen. Long enough for Trump to milk it as his doing somehow, that's for sure. But after trying to imply it was Hamas changing the deal when they'd already agreed to it and he hadn't, it soon came out he was up to his old tricks again. Yet the deal still passed, so what shifted and how long will the ceasefire last for now? Because, above all else, Netanyahu has made it abundantly clear he's going to go back into Gaza again. And actually we shouldn't be surprised by that because he really doesn't have any choice if he wants to stay in power. Right, so the ceasefire finally passed, though it did have a bit of a delay in the end, didn't it? As Israel all of a sudden decided they wouldn't sign it into being until Hamas handed over an up-to-date list of all their hostages. But as it turns out, they had problems doing that because Israel would not withdraw reconnaissance drones as agreed. A technical obstacle, as Hamas called this, in getting the information Israel required. So was this incidental or intentional by Israel? Well, I can possibly comment. You decide that one. But the changes Netanyahu demanded at the last minute, which is how he's wrecked every other ceasefire, can't be ignored as yet another attempt to do just that, perhaps. As part of phase one of the deal, Israel was to withdraw completely from the Philadelphia corridor, the border between Egypt and Gaza, of which Israel's ongoing occupation is a violation of peace accords in place since 1978 between Israel and Egypt, which has kept the peace in the region, ensured the two countries do not go to war with each other again, safe shipping and commerce through the Suez Canal, and all of that, for one, depends on it. Yet Netanyahu decided to throw a spanner in the works by stating that not only were Israel going to remain there through phase one, but that the number of soldiers there through phase one was going to increase. The first phase of the deal is due to last for 42 days, and now the Philadelphia corridor won't be cleared by Israel, apparently, until day 50, into the second phase, which has not yet been agreed to. Functionally, all we have right now is another humanitarian pause in Gaza, as we saw at the end of 2023. A 6-week ceasefire is what we have, and this declaration by Netanyahu that his troops will stay there comes along with a few other announcements, and the position actually being taken by Trump in relation to such matters, because far from ending atrocities, he may make matters even worse now, as this clip shows.
Since he was elected, Trump was completely committed to the release of the hostages. We spoke on Wednesday. He congratulated me on the agreement, and he emphasized, and rightly so, that the first stage is a temporary ceasefire. This is what he said, a temporary ceasefire. Towards the next stages of the agreement, we are holding on to some significant assets so that we can bring back all of the hostages, and in order to accomplish all the goals of the war. Both President Trump and President Biden have provided full backing to Israel's right to resume fighting, to resume combat, if Israel reaches the conclusion that the negotiations over the second stage are pointless. I truly appreciate that. I also appreciate the decision of President Trump to lift all the remaining restrictions on the providing of essential munitions and weapons to the State of Israel. If we need to resume combat, we will do so in new ways, and we will do so with tremendous force.
The first stage is a temporary ceasefire. The hostages, most of them, all but the men, will have been released by the end of the first phase. We are holding on to some significant assets, says Benjamin Netanyahu there, such as the Philadelphia corridor, presumably, so they can rescue all of the hostages, implying no commitment to phase two. The rescue attempts by Israel previously have, of course, been nonsense, and to accomplish all of the goals of the war, he said. But that would mean wiping out Hamas, and, well, you've let them rebuild, haven't you? You couldn't bring them down at all. They were able to fire rockets from Beit Hanun in the north of the Gaza Strip, for example, which was actually the very first town in northern Gaza to fall to IDF forces following October 7th. So if they were still there and still armed, how on earth can you claim to still be on course to achieve all of your goals? You're talking out of your tush, man. Biden has sent his assent to resume fighting. Well, colour me surprised. But Trump has said the same thing, and Trump has committed, much like Biden before him, to doing whatever it takes to ensure an Israel win. Though, of course, all of that depends on whether Israel decide the rest of the agreement, phases 2 and 3, which would require full withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, are pointless. Well, who would bet against that being the eventual outcome? Are you brave enough? Trump, in point of fact, could end up being even worse than Biden, because according to that footage, even Biden had some restrictions on the kind of military aid Israel could have. Yet Trump, at least according to Netanyahu, has given assurances he'd lift any restrictions in place completely. And also we have to bear in mind that the negotiations concerning the full ending of the atrocities won't even begin until day 16 of phase 1. And if they don't go well, who's to say the first phase will even reach the end before Netanyahu pulls the plug on it? It's not a case of if Netanyahu pulls the plug on this ceasefire, on this deal, but when. Trump, we know, will back him now when the time suits him. And already we've seen Itamar Ben-Gvir's Otzma Yehudit party leave Netanyahu's coalition government. Not enough to bring the government down in and of itself, that move, but stating they will return only if and when Israel's genocide in Gaza resumes, and crucially saying that they will oppose any attempt to bring down Netanyahu in the meantime, because they have him exactly where they want him, and frankly that's how depraved that party is. But despite these last-minute changes to this deal, the ceasefire still began yesterday, though. It still went through. 3 Israeli captives were released, happy, smiling, tired, but relieved, it would be fair to say, carrying gift bags they had been given by their Hamas captors, and considering what they've lived through these last 15 months of Israel raining fire down on the Gaza Strip north to south, almost certainly near their locations at times, surely it's impossible to be otherwise, and with so many of their fellow captives having been killed in said strikes at that, they actually looked little the worse for wear for their ordeal. The gift bags they were given apparently contain a necklace, a certificate of their time in captivity, and photographs from their time in captivity, which would very much document their time and their treatment whilst they were being held in Gaza. And so naturally, the Israeli government confiscated these immediately. God forbid news they might have been treated well get out, though I dare say eventually we'll see some of these images make their way online. Many more hostages are still to be released after all, and I'm sure Hamas won't make the same mistake twice and make sure these photographs do get out into the public sphere somehow. Whilst that got a lot of media focus and attention, though, the release of some 90 Palestinian hostages, when so many were held on bogus terms or without charge completely, they were not prisoners, they were captives, they were hostages too. They had clearly not been treated well at all, as this excerpt from Squawk Box today, titled Stark Difference Between Conditions of Released Israeli Captives and Palestinians Held Hostage, has spelt out. The 90 Palestinians released looked far different. Adel Zakarna was afraid to embrace his mother in case she caught any of the parasites and diseases he had picked up in prison, but unsurprisingly they were having none of it. Khalida Jarrar, who had been detained for 10 years for giving speeches and lectures the Israeli regime disapproved of, looked a different woman from the one who went into captivity. Others who were released were embraced by their families but could not bear to face the cameras. Even those who had been detained for a relatively short time emerged looking thin and worn, or stunned and traumatized. This is a before and after image of Khalida Jarrar, for the record, compared to that of the smiling faces of one of the released Hamas hostages. It is an image that has already become symbolic of the suffering Palestinians have endured under Israeli detention. Didn't take long, and it's little wonder to see why, the poor woman. A short statement on this, allegedly from Hamas, put out by the Warfare Analysis Twitter channel, said, "Photos of the release of the 3 enemy female prisoners who were in good physical and psychological health, while our male and female prisoners show signs of neglect and exhaustion. This highlights the stark contrast between the values and ethics of the resistance and the barbarism and fascism of the occupation." Where the Hamas captives were greeted by cheering, crying and overjoyed families, Palestinian families were warned not to show joy by Israel, just as was the case previously when hostages were exchanged. One instance where familial joy could not be contained, well, they got tear-gassed. Aid is importantly now getting into Gaza, though. 200 trucks have made it in today, and this includes to northern Gaza as well. And this follows 630 trucks that entered as soon as the ceasefire began, so this is a great start. How long the ceasefire holds, though, how long before there are verified breaches of it, by Israel more likely, who can guess? I've seen some unverified reports on social media that Israel has already done this. They may well be firmed up yet. It's not hard to believe that, especially following what we've seen Israel get up to in Lebanon. But let's pray it holds for a while yet. But let's also not delude ourselves into thinking that Netanyahu will allow this to become permanent. His job depends on that never happening. Meanwhile, a ceasefire would, however, give Netanyahu some time to prepare for another court case, perhaps, as the ICC now hears another case involving him and 7 other Israelis on genocide charges and crimes against humanity. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do like, share and subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't already done so, to ensure you don't miss out on new daily content, and help support the channel as well, which is very much appreciated. And I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.